Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood should have been peaceful. But ever since the new Homeowners Association, HOA, president, Mr. Lasker, took over, things had become unbearable. He was a retired lawyer with too much time on his hands and a strict interpretation of the HOA rules, especially about vehicles. He had been harassing residents over minor infractions, issuing fines for slightly faded paint and grass growing half an inch too high. But his biggest obsession was my car, a perfectly functioning, classic 1995 Mustang that I was restoring with my grandfather before he passed. Though it sat in my garage, out of public view, Mr. Lasker declared it a junk vehicle and claimed it was against HOA guidelines. I ignored his warnings, refusing to move it. One evening, while I was out, he took things to an extreme. Security cameras later revealed him sneaking onto my property with a bolt cutter, disabling the side gate lock, and making his way toward my garage. He fumbled with a set of tools, prying at the garage door lock, muttering angrily under his breath about setting an example for the neighborhood. Finally, with a snap, the lock gave way. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, a flashlight illuminating the dimly lit space. His target was clear, my Mustang. He had a tow truck waiting just down the road, ready to take what he saw as an unauthorized vehicle away. But he wasn't alone in that garage. My grandmother, a retired Marine with nerves of steel, had been inside organizing storage boxes. She heard the break-in and crouched behind some shelves, gripping a wooden cane. As Mr. Lasker stepped closer, she made her move. With a swift motion, she kicked a box over, making a loud crash. He spun around in shock, only to see the shadowy figure of my grandmother stepping forward. "You picked the wrong house, son," she said in her firm, no-nonsense voice. Mr. Lasker froze in place, his flashlight beam shaking as he tried to make sense of what was happening. My grandmother, despite being in her 70s, carried herself like a soldier in battle, her posture straight, her grip on the cane firm. She took a slow step forward, her steel-gray eyes locking onto the intruder. "Mind telling me why you're sneaking into my grandson's garage?" she asked, her voice dripping with authority. Lasker swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. I'm enforcing HOA regulations," he stammered. "This vehicle is in violation of community guidelines, and it needs to be removed immediately." He gestured toward the Mustang, though his confidence was slipping fast. My grandmother let out a low chuckle, shaking her head. "Is that right? So you think breaking and entering is part of your HOA duties now?" She tapped her cane on the concrete floor, the sharp sound making Lasker flinch. "Because where I come from, we call that a crime?" Lasker straightened up, attempting to mask his nervousness with arrogance. "Look, lady," he snapped. "The HOA rules state that inoperable vehicles cannot be stored on the property. This thing is a junk heap, and I have the authority to remove it." He pulled a folded document from his pocket, shoving it toward my grandmother, as if it were a legal decree. But she didn't even glance at it. Instead, she took another step forward, tilting her head. "That's cute," she mused. "But tell me something, lawyer man. Where exactly in your little rulebook does it say you can trespass on a private property?" Lasker opened his mouth, but no words came out. My grandmother continued, her tone sharp as a blade. "I've seen people like you before, thinking a clipboard and a title makes you a big man. But you're standing in my grandson's garage, on my family's property, and I don't take kindly to trespassers." Lasker tried to backpedal. "Look, ma'am, let's not make a big deal out of this. I was just, inspecting the situation." But my grandmother wasn't letting him off that easy. She took another step, closing the distance between them. "Inspection's over," she said flatly. "Now you've got two choices. One, you march yourself out of here, call that tow truck, and tell them to get lost before I do it for you. Two, I call the cops, show them this footage, and let them decide how many laws you just broke." Lasker paled, his eyes darting to the security camera mounted in the corner. That's when the realization hit him. He was caught, and there was no smooth talking his way out of it. His hand twitched toward his phone, probably debating whether to call off the tow truck or try to fake some legal excuse. But before he could decide, my grandmother leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "If I were you," she said, "I'd start running." That was the breaking point. Lasker bolted toward the garage door, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to escape. He yanked it open and dashed out into the driveway, frantically waving at the tow truck driver to leave. The truck rumbled away, its driver shaking his head in confusion. My grandmother stood in the garage doorway, watching him flee with a smirk. "That's what I thought," she muttered before turning back inside. By the time I got home, she was calmly sipping a cup of tea at the kitchen table, as if nothing had happened. She casually told me to check the security footage, and when I did, my jaw nearly hit the floor. "So, what do you want to do about it?" she asked, stirring her tea. I grinned. "Oh, we're going to make sure the whole neighborhood knows." The next morning, I wasted no time. I downloaded the security footage, clipped the juiciest parts, and sent them to the neighborhood group chat. Every HOA member, every homeowner, even a few folks who didn't usually care about community drama. The video of Mr. Lasker breaking into my garage, fumbling like a common thief, and then running for his life after facing my grandmother spread like wildfire. People responded instantly, some in shock, some in absolute amusement. One neighbor, Mr. Calloway, an older man who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, chimed in. "I knew Lasker was a pain, but this is next level stupid." Others followed. "So the HOA president is a criminal now? Hope someone calls the cops on him. Your grandma is a legend. Does she offer security services?" Within an hour, Lasker must have seen the messages because he started damage control. He sent a long, frantic message claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that he had lawful authority to enter my garage, that he was just doing his job. But no one bought it. The neighborhood had been putting up with his nonsense for too long, and this was the final straw. Then came a cherry on top. My grandmother, sipping her morning tea, casually suggested, "Why don't we pay the HOA board a visit?" She had that twinkle in her eye, the one that meant she was about to make someone very uncomfortable. So we did. We walked straight into the HOA's scheduled morning meeting at the clubhouse, where Lasker was already sweating bullets, probably expecting us. The other board members, some of whom weren't fans of his overreach, looked confused as I pulled out my phone and hit play. The entire room watched in stunned silence as the footage of Lasker breaking in, then my grandmother confronting him, played out. His pathetic attempt at retreating, his panicked run out of the garage, the way he almost tripped over his own feet, it was all on display. When the video ended, my grandmother crossed her arms and looked directly at him. "Now, Mr. Lasker," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a general addressing a rookie soldier. "Care to explain what gives you the right to break into my family's garage?" Lasker opened and closed his mouth like a fish gasping for air. He tried to spin it, tried to talk about the HOA rules, about property value, about doing what's best for the community, but no one was buying it. One board member, a woman named Mrs. Patel, shook her head. "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen," she muttered. Another, Mr. Harris, who had been skeptical of Lasker's aggressive leadership, stood up. "I moved to have Mr. Lasker removed as HOA president immediately." That was it. The motion was seconded before Lasker could even blink. The vote was unanimous. Just like that, he was out. But the humiliation didn't stop there. A few neighbors had taken it upon themselves to share the footage outside the HOA chat, to the local community forum, Facebook, and even a few news outlets that loved a good HOA gone wrong story. By the end of the day, Lasker's reputation was in shambles. His face plastered on social media with captions like, "HOA president tries to steal a car, gets wrecked by grandma." Then came the legal consequences. One of my neighbors, a former police officer, pointed out that Lasker had definitely committed trespassing, possibly even attempted theft or unlawful entry. Another neighbor, a lawyer, said that my family could sue for damages, including the broken garage lock. That same evening, I got a call from an actual HOA attorney. Not some flimsy legal authority Lasker had pretended to have, but the real legal team representing the homeowners. They wanted to meet with us. My grandmother and I went in the next morning, and the moment we sat down, one of the attorneys slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal apology letter drafted by the HOA, stating that my Mustang was not a violation of any community guidelines and that the HOA would be officially retracting any complaints against it. They also included a check, money to cover any damages caused by Lasker's break-in. But what about him? I asked, glancing at the 3 board members sitting in the room. Is he just going to walk away? One of them chuckled, shaking his head. Oh no. Mr. Lasker has quite a few things to worry about. First off, the HOA is pressing charges for his unauthorized actions, including misusing HOA resources for personal vendettas. Second, the community is considering a civil lawsuit for harassment. And third, well, the board member grinned. He's moving. He put his house up for sale last night. That night, I sat on the porch with my grandmother, both of us watching as Lasker packed up his car, preparing to leave town for a while. Maybe forever. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with any of the neighbors who had come out to watch the show. A few people clapped sarcastically as he loaded his suitcases. One guy even shouted, "Don't forget to follow your own rules on the way out." You know, I said, sipping my soda, I don't think he'll be bothering anyone again. My grandmother smirked, leaning back in her chair. Damn right he won't. Then, after a pause, she added, but just in case, maybe I should leave my cane by the front door. We both laughed, the sweet taste of victory settling in. My Mustang stayed right where it belonged. My grandmother became a neighborhood hero. And Mr. Lasker? Well, he became the cautionary tale no future HOA president would ever forget.